We're proud to support the craft of journalism. UBS brings you the latest news from around the world with The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Be part of an international network that brings together leading insights, research, and technology across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs, with you at the center of it all. UBS. Advice is our craft.
You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 21st of April 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up,
if for some reason one of the two parties makes it very difficult, we're just going to say you're foolish, you're fools, you're horrible people.
a military gesture of goodwill or a way to keep Washington hooked on brokering peace. We'll examine Moscow's short-lived Easter ceasefire and its operation in Ukraine. Also ahead in the next 60 minutes, can India and the US build a trade deal? The US Vice President arrives in India to pay a visit to Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And
amidst the rubble and the shifting sense of power, I have found hope for the future of Syria. People are reclaiming their public spaces again through celebrations, memorials and gatherings.
We hear of one correspondent's return home to Syria after 14 years of exile. Plus the newspapers and the latest from the world of food. That's all coming up on The Globalist, live from London. First, a quick look at what else is happening in today's news. Israel's military has admitted its soldiers made mistakes when they opened fire on a convoy of emergency vehicles in Gaza last month, killing 15 rescue workers. A ship carrying Syria's first wheat delivery since the fall of the Assad regime has docked in the port of Latakia, and the US military has deployed for the first time a type of strategic bomber to an airbase in Japan. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories. But first, 2 hours after Easter's brief ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine came into effect on Saturday evening, President Zelensky of Ukraine accused Russia of violating it. The Russian President Vladimir Putin had unexpectedly announced the truce, which he said would last until the end of yesterday. But by mid-evening on Saturday, Kyiv said that the Russian attacks were continuing. Well, the announcement of this ceasefire came after the US said it would abandon its efforts to end the war unless there were signs of progress in the coming days. Well, to bring us up to date on the events that have happened this weekend, I'm joined by Jenny Mathers, who's Senior Lecturer in International Politics at Aberystwyth University. A very good morning to you, Jenny.
Good morning.
So what exactly happened this weekend in terms of this ceasefire? Because by the end of the Sunday, there were claims that it had been violated no fewer than 2,000 times.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the ceasefire was announced by Putin completely unexpectedly, without any sort of consultation with Ukraine. So that's the first thing to point out. And it's unclear whether even Russian military commanders were aware that it was going to happen very much before it was announced. Putin called upon Zelensky to participate in the ceasefire, and Zelensky indicated that, yes, all right, if Russia didn't attack Ukraine, Ukraine wouldn't attack Russia, but otherwise, no. And there were almost immediately, hundreds of reports from the front lines that the Russians were continuing to attack. Trump over the weekend called for the ceasefire to be extended, but Putin, through his spokesman, evidently declined this offer. So it was a short-term, one-time deal only, and apparently not really a genuine ceasefire at all.
And indeed, very practically, very difficult to enact. It is incredibly hard just to stop fighting just like that, because the announcement came very quickly from Vladimir Putin. So what do we believe the purpose of this 30-hour pause was?
Well, it's almost certainly a performance designed for an audience in the White House. Putin was understanding that Trump was getting impatient, and both Trump and Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, had said publicly that actually they were getting fed up, and if there wasn't progress on peace in Ukraine soon, that they might just pull the plug and sort of walk away. So Putin feels the need to keep Trump on side, and so this was clearly a gesture towards indicating that Putin's interested in peace, but it doesn't really have any meaningful kind of steps towards a genuine peace. This is really just performance.
It's interesting that you say that Putin is trying to keep the United States on side, because given the comments at the end of last week when the Americans were at the point of saying we're walking away from this, that was suggesting that actually the Americans couldn't get anywhere with Putin.
Yes, I think the White House has been frustrated because its overtures towards a general 30-day ceasefire were rebuffed by Putin, who then responded with this idea of a ceasefire directed against energy infrastructure, which of course benefits Russia enormously. And the White House really hadn't been able to make any further steps towards more meaningful peace. But at the same time, the Trump administration officials were very easily distracted towards talking about other things like the deals that they might do with Russia, or the beautiful portrait of Trump that Putin had painted and sent back with Steve Witkoff. So yes, on the one hand, the White House is frustrated, but on the other hand, they're not really keeping their nose to the grindstone and trying hard to pressure Russia. Instead, they've been trying harder to pressure Ukraine.
Is this because ending a war seemed pretty simple on paper before we went into the Trump administration from the point of view of Donald Trump, but it's suddenly been accepted that ending this war is probably rather too tricky and bothersome for Washington to want to be bothered with it?
Well, yes, I think the priority for Trump personally is to get credit for a big foreign policy victory, and ending the war in Ukraine would be a big contrast with the Biden administration, which he constantly compares himself to, and it would also remove an obstacle towards improved relations between the U.S. and Russia, which is clearly something that Trump is eager to get to, trading relations in particular. And so I think there is a worry, certainly among the Europeans and among the Ukrainians, that Trump will just get impatient and decide to skip the peace part and go straight to the part about lifting sanctions on Russia and doing deals with Putin. And
the issue is that there were discussions last week, and it was clear that the United States did seem to have a serious ceasefire plan. It's the one that the Ukrainians agreed to in March. But there is now reports that the Trump administration is ready to recognise Russian control of Crimea as part of its proposal. There is very much that sense that Russia would be getting the advantage here, no doubt.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's no sense in which the Trump administration is putting pressure on Putin. There's no sense in which the Trump administration understands Ukraine's very genuine security needs and concerns and wants to take them into consideration in any kind of a ceasefire or a peace deal. So yes, Trump is very much headed towards Putin in terms of Trump's understanding of the conflict. And increasingly over the past several months and weeks, we've seen the U.S. Adopt more and more of Russia's sort of rhetoric around the conflict and around what a peace deal might look like. And so now we're at the point even of U.S. officials apparently saying, well, let's just, recognize Crimea. Let's draw the lines where they are now in the conflict. Let's let Russia have those 5 territories that it claims to have annexed. Let's keep Ukraine out of NATO, and so on and so on. So it's hard to see that any really of Ukraine's security concerns are being incorporated into Washington's talking points.
Well, let's talk about Ukraine in a moment. I mean, what happened to Ukraine over the weekend, given the fact that it indeed retaliated to the Russian continuation of its offensive, despite the announcement of the ceasefire. But to what degree does Ukraine now find itself on the back foot diplomatically with Russia? Sorry, with the United States?
Well, it's only on the back foot diplomatically with the U.S. because the Trump administration seems determined to find fault and to criticize Ukraine and to regard Ukraine with a great deal of hostility and skepticism, really, because the difference between the way that the Trump officials treat claims from the Russian side and the way that they treat claims from the Ukrainian side are very, very stark. So, claims from Putin seem to be treated with a great deal of sympathy. Claims from Zelensky seem to be treated with a great deal of hostility. So, yes, Zelensky is having a very tough time dealing with this administration because it's no matter what Zelensky offers and no matter what he says he's willing to do, the Trump administration seems to not regard that as being significant at all.
We are seeing, though, there are going to be talks this week in London. Trump's team is heading to London for ceasefire talks. Ukraine is going to be present as well. Could you tell us what's likely to happen at these talks?
Sure. So these are talks which are following on from last week's talks in Paris, which also involved British, French, German, American, and Ukrainian officials. And it's a sort of a development to talk about what might be a proper 30-day ceasefire, general ceasefire leading to a peace agreement. So the idea behind this week's meeting in London is that the Europeans, the Americans, and the Ukrainians will talk about the Americans' idea for a 30-day ceasefire and how that might lead to peace proposals, and that they would get agreement at the London talks and then offer this proposal up to the Russians for them to decide if they want to sign up to it or not. So it's important in that it brings the Americans together with the Europeans and the Ukrainians. It gives them all a chance to talk to each other and to understand directly from each other what their positions are. But then the question is, of course, how will the Russians respond to this? Will they respond any differently than they have in the past?
Indeed. I mean, we see reports that the Russians are going to be offered this. The Trump envoy Keith Kellogg has said we're heading to London to find, to lock in this potential short-term ceasefire. The likelihood of Russia agreeing to that is what?
Well, it seems almost infinitesimally small in that, Putin had the opportunity and he was called upon not only by the Ukrainians, but also by the Americans to extend the Easter ceasefire for a full 30 days. And that would have really been a much more meaningful gesture towards an interest in a longer-term agreement on the part of the Russians. And Putin evidently has refused. We haven't heard this directly from Putin, but from his spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, has said Putin has not given the order to extend the ceasefire. So the idea that he would then just accept basically a rerun, as far as we understand it, of the original proposal of a 30-day general ceasefire, it seems pretty unlikely.
Thank you so much for joining us on the line. That was Jenny Mathers there. You're listening to The Globalist. Now, good friend or the king of tariff abuse, Donald Trump has wildly contradicting views of India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The two men enjoy good personal relations, but it hasn't stopped President Trump from targeting the country with a blanket 26% levy as part of his tariff program. Well, while that program is paused, the US Vice President J.D. Vance has just landed in India and will be meeting the Indian Prime Minister for talks on a potential trade deal. I'm joined by Lindy Prickett, Monocle's New Delhi correspondent. Good afternoon, Lindy.
Hello. Good morning.
Thank you very much indeed. We've just seen J.D. Vance and his wife arrive in India, red carpet, full ceremonial guard waiting for them. It's a big event, isn't it?
Oh, yes, it certainly is. America and India have had quite a special relationship ever since Modi was in office, even before, you could argue. And there's this connection, of course, as we know. J.D. Vance, his wife Usha, is of Indian origin. So it's sort of seen as a homecoming of sorts and a bringing to the country a big friend and ally on many different levels. But it is going to be some fun. There's a wedding in store and there's some tourism, but there's definitely going to be some talking business as well.
Well, let's move back to that because we now have J.D. Vance likely to have a conversation with Narendra Modi. Their starting point, isn't there, is the avoidance of tariffs.
Oh, yeah, that definitely rocked India. Of course, everybody, was slightly prepared to see this train crash that was coming before everybody's eyes. It was interesting because some people said, oh, India actually fared better than expected because it wasn't as harsh as it was on China, yet it certainly wasn't as good as it's been to, good is not the right word. They weren't as severe as they were for Europe and definitely, of course, Mexico and Canada getting sort of a pass. So everybody wants to know if there can be a trade deal that can mitigate this fear of the tariffs that are hanging over India, especially at a time when India is trying to really make its pitch to be an alternative to China. And that's where a lot of pundits here are really talking about where the real sort of crux of the matter is here is how much China plays into these talks. And will China be the elephant in the room, or will they come right out at it and sort of talk about how India can be a counterbalance?
In what way? Because we have to examine, but what would a 20% tariff imposition do to India's exports to the US?
Well, let's not forget that India's biggest trade partner is the US. Okay, it's not a two-way conversation there, or a two-way sort of partnership there, though. We know that America has much bigger trades with other countries, as I mentioned, Mexico for one. So India has sort of more at stake. And it really, really wants to try and reduce the tariff cost so that it can have their fledgling industries just booming and blossoming and growing. But if they can come out of it without as strong a tariffs as China, even if obviously every percentage point counts, but there's also the perception game here too, as India wants to be that counterweight to China. So there's a little bit of sort of, smug laughter at, oh man, China's in the doghouse and they're the ones that are getting it. And let's not forget, we've got the oldest democracy and the largest democracy. So there's these two democracies coming together saying, hey, we have to have the strong relationship here. And if we do that, we can help America have that counterbalance to China. And that will play a part in many different ways. Both countries are very keen that their defense sector gets buy-in. Okay, Vance is supposed to be coming here and probably pushing India to try and buy more of its American defense products. Well, it's interesting because the defense sector is booming in India too. And India is, while it doesn't see necessarily America as a client, it is growing its defense sector a lot. So I think that there's a degree of, let's see if we can scratch each other's backs here and help these industries grow. The other big industry that's being talked about, though, is tech. This is a sore point for India. They don't just want tariffs to be more in their favor. Of course, the U.S. would say that it's they're just trying to right an imbalance there. But I think that a lot of people in India feel that there isn't a lot of the technology information and advanced R&D that's being shared that India would like to see to help its own homegrown tech sector blossom as well. This is where
Usha Vance, Mrs. Vance, comes in, isn't it? Because from her part of India, from her family's part of India, there have been the departure of tens of thousands of engineers and software specialists, and they've all gone to the United States.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's the other talking point that might be brought up. Which is, hey, why are you giving hard visa choices to our guys? We're the ones sending you the professional class. We're the ones that are trying to help your tech sector. You're right. There's been, you could say, a brain drain, a massive exodus of a lot of the finest and sharpest brains in India have gone across and helped America's tech sector boom and blossom as well. And I think that they're saying, why are you cutting back our visa options? India was the country that was hit the most on those visas. So that's likely to be another discussion point, that we have helped your tech sector from this brain drain that's happened, and we've helped it grow. And yet now you're cutting that off too. So there's going to be a lot of discussion. How much will be discussed and how much they'll get through, that'll be interesting. There's the official talk, and then there's a dinner afterwards. So it will be interesting to see what we hear on the sidelines of those.
Indeed. I mean, how welcome is J.D. Vance in the United States? I mean, it is, as you know, it's been well documented that Trump and Modi get on very well. But Vance, and especially, Usha and the family, and they've all been sort of, all the children have been dressed up in traditional Indian outfits as they departed the plane this morning. Is there sort of a swell of warmth to the United States?
Oh, yeah. That bromance between Modi and Trump was there, and it still sort of was rekindled in February when Modi was one of the first foreign leaders that Trump saw. And the sort of love by association is there for Vance. Just this morning, I was in the diplomatic zone, and there were pictures of J.D. Vance all over welcoming him here. And I think that you're right about the very special connect. Look, this is a guy who cooks Indian food. He loves Indian traditions. As you say, his kids are here and they're dressed in an Indian garb, and that goes down so well here. Who doesn't love somebody from another place coming into your culture and embracing it and celebrating it? So there is quite a lot of bonhomie. There's different factions and different circles, of course. There are people who are not as keen on America. There are people who aren't as keen on Trump, and those aren't always the same circle, interestingly enough. But I think overall, there's definitely a feeling of, woohoo, all right, Vance is in town and Usha's in her homeland. And I think there's a little bit of pride.
Lindy Priggett, thank you so much for joining us on the line. Still to come on today's programme.
Amidst the rubble and the shifting sense of power, I have found hope for the future of Syria. People are reclaiming their public spaces again through celebrations, memorials and gatherings.
We hear from a Syrian architect as he returns to his home country for the first time since the end of the Assad regime. Stay with us on The Globalist.
Craft is a matter of perspective, a unique outlook, an obsessive attention to detail. With UBS House View, you get the big picture in bite-sized articles, delivered daily and curated by over 200 globally connected, locally active analysts, all focused on identifying the latest investment opportunities and market risks to help you achieve your financial goals. UBS, banking is our craft.
8:21 a.m. in Zurich, 7:21 here in London. Let's continue with today's newspapers. Joining me in the studio is Vincent McAviney, journalist and Monocle Radio regular politics commentator. Good morning, Vinny.
Good morning.
Good to have you with us.
Yeah, it's a wet Easter Monday.
It isn't it just? It is what it is for the United Kingdom. You're going for your run again, aren't you?
Yeah, I've got 3 more to go, and then the marathon on Sunday.
He's doing the London Marathon, everybody. Right. Let's look at the papers. News that broke overnight through the New York Times. Pete Hegseth, US Defense Secretary, he was involved in a chat that was leaked, or rather there was a high-profile journalist who was accidentally added to the chat, which discussed the bombing of Houthi rebels by the United States last month. A second signal chat has now emerged.
Yeah, and I think this potentially is the tip of the iceberg, to be honest. This is another chat that Pete Hegseth had on a public app again, Signal, and it was called Defense Team Huddle that he had apparently set up some months ago. It included advisors, but it also included people like his wife, Jennifer, a former Fox News producer who is not a Defense Department employee, also had his brother and his personal lawyer in it, who apparently are working in the Pentagon now. But he discussed in this group chat detailed information about the forthcoming strikes in Yemen on the 15th of March. And there are questions as to why he would in any way need to do this. Hegseth shared on the chat the flight schedules of the FA-18 Hornets targeting the Houthis in Yemen, essentially the sort of attack plans that he shared in the other chat. And it raises real questions now because the word coming out from the Pentagon is that things are chaotic under him. He is someone who had no experience leading an organization really of any size. He was a former military man himself, but then he was the sort of Fox News Saturday cover anchor for its breakfast show. And he's now leading the biggest military the world has ever seen, one of the biggest organizations in the world. And it shows that there is, again, a lack of judgment as to how he's dealing with sensitive information.
I mean, indeed, he's talking about Mrs. Hegseth, Jennifer Hegseth. She's the New York Times is reporting the fact that he's brought her into meetings with foreign military counterparts. That this seems to be sort of an open door policy.
Bring your wife to work day. I mean, she doesn't have security clearance. She has no right to be in these meetings. It is extraordinary. And the problem is as well, further down the chain, it then potentially means that people take security issues less seriously because they look at the top and they see what's going on. And if you are someone working in, something which is highly sensitive but also precarious for yourself, you might wonder, well, why am I doing this? Because I can't trust that the superiors are going to protect me as much as I need, if you've got any kind of cover going on.
This is something that isn't just common with the United States, although what happens is in Washington seems to be being revealed chat by chat. But when you look at, I think it was a couple of years ago, an awful lot of WhatsApp chats that took place inside the British government under the Boris Johnson prime ministerial tenure. There was an awful lot of sort of like loose lips there as well. This is a bigger problem.
Indeed, and it's potentially as well to circumvent the sort of traditional methods of storing this information, archiving it for the future, which is really important. And we saw it here, we've seen it already in the ongoing COVID inquiry, where it seems that at some point in the pandemic, quite a few politicians, I know Nicola Sturgeon did this, who was the former First Minister of Scotland, others did it as well, they turned on disappearing chat so that it was all erasing itself. And you do have to wonder, it's quite remarkable, really, that for the US military, which has a budget now of, approaching sort of $1 trillion, you've got all that technology, and yet you're using your personal phones and a publicly available app. You would think that they could create some kind of internal closed app system. I get that, this kind of data, you're meant to access it in a facility called a sort of SCIF, which is a secure thing. You don't bring in your own devices. You don't bring in, it's meant to be air-gapped, basically. But it is remarkable that and you kind of get the need sometimes on the fly that people might need to access things or speak quickly, but to do it on a publicly available app, which China, Russia potentially could have backdoors into, is remarkable.
Let's move on to a story from the Globe and Mail from Canada. There is a big push by people to vote early.
Yes, this is an interesting story about early voting. And this is something, voting systems around the world are really sort of coming under strain because people are much more used to more available and sort of quicker and readier choice. And so we've seen this, in the United States. It's something that Donald Trump initially sort of raged against before it was explained to him that this was something that might actually help him. And now we've got Canadians also taking to the polls early in this snap election.
And just explain to us a little bit more about the significance of this one, because obviously everyone's looking at this newcomer. Well, lots of people know him from old, Mark Carney, and the significance of this early push for voting.
What's really interesting here, and I think this is going to be watched incredibly closely around the world, is we've seen a trend in the past few years where effectively any government, any leader that was in place during the pandemic was ousted out or they burnt out themselves. And there has been a huge change. But what we're seeing, what's interesting is we're seeing the first real reaction to Donald Trump and the tariffs coming in. Now, Mark Carney's Liberal Party has been in power for a long time. For a decade, Justin Trudeau was in position. His polling was, really dire towards the end of his term, but it picked up right at the end because of the fight that Trump took with him, which is, and I work in Canadian media, they see this as existential, that he's trying to break their economy, that he wants to annex the country. They see that as a genuine threat now. And Mark Carney, who was the former Bank of England governor here, he was the former Bank of Canada governor, he has managed to come in. Yes, he's playing the outsider ticket. I wasn't around for the last decade. I'm a new generation. I'm the next generation. But he has managed to secure, calling this election quickly, he's managed to get ahead because he's seen as a trusted and experienced hand on the global stage in world economics who could, strongly resist Canada. And he's managed to go from a Liberal potential defeat to now being quite far ahead in the polls. He had debates in English and French last week. His French is a little bit ropey, but he's managed to win over Quebec simply, where normally traditionally he wouldn't be playing as much because he is running on the anti-Trump ticket. And the right party in Canada, led by Poilievre, has really suffered. Carney was sort of trolling him last week, saying, I know you want to run against Trudeau, but things have changed. Trump's after us. I'm going to lead us through it. It's quite a remarkable election to watch.
A quick look at France 24's coverage of the fact that 27 left-wing lawmakers have had their visas cancelled trying to get into Israel. It sort of coincides with the fact that a few weeks ago, Emmanuel Macron, not the left-wing, the right-wing president, has said that he would be happy to acknowledge a state of Palestine within the next couple of months. That's clearly irked the Israelis.
Yeah, absolutely. Emmanuel Macron said he might do this at a conference in the summer. And so 27 French left-wing lawmakers, both kind of national and regional ones, have had the visas that they needed to go into Israel cancelled 2 days before they were starting a trip. They'd been invited there by the French sort of embassy consulate. And it's very normal for MPs of all countries to do these kind of exchanges, to go particularly to Israel to get a grasp of the situation for themselves, to talk to people on the ground so that they have an understanding. But this is the latest in a cancellation. It happened in February it happened last month to two British members of Parliament, Yuan Yang and Abdissam Mohammed, but they got all the way to Tel Aviv airport before being turned around and sent back, something the British Foreign Secretary said was unacceptable. So, if Israel is trying to win support around the world, taking action like this makes it incredibly difficult for governments to try and stand by them, because it looks like they're hiding what's really going on.
And finally, there's a lovely article in the Times from this weekend about the science of having a perfect day. Some poor reporter was told to stop working and go home and have fun. And she struggled for the first 4 paragraphs. And then she ended up going and having a cup of tea with her mother, and it was wonderful. There is these lovely ideas of, these slightly strange ideas, dare I say, of being able to say, if you spend 2 hours exercising and if you eat for an hour and drink for an hour, whatever, you will have a perfect day. The fact that someone's actually trying to quantify happiness is strange.
Well, it's not someone, it's something, it's AI. So this is an AI-designed perfect day, which has come up with all of this. And I think it sort of forgets the practical things of, it's sort of saying only work for 6 hours, and it's sort of ignoring travel times and the fact that, your friends, as she quickly found out on a random Thursday when she was told to go and do this, none of her friends were available. She ended up with her mother, which is part of it, spending 6 hours with your family, which she said, she sort of only does these days. She's about 31. She only does at Christmas. But it's an interesting, fun chat, and it sort of does make you think, what is going to be your perfect day? Where is it? Who is it with? I think the problem with this is she was told at 11 to go out and do this, and it's just not enough notice. I think the computer doesn't quite understand that, to design a day like this where you've got 2 hours with friends, 6 hours with family, 2 hours exercise, only 6 hours of work, that takes a lot of organisation in advance, which makes it potentially not the perfect day if you're having to work that hard to organise it.
Indeed, and plus you should have that brilliant thing of telling people, right, I've had enough time with you, I'm going to stop and go and have perfection elsewhere. Vincent McAviney, thank you so much for joining me in the studio. The time here in London is 7:31 a.m. You're listening to The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A look now at some of the other stories we're keeping an eye on today. The US Defence Secretary has been connected with a second group chat which shared sensitive military information about a US attack on Houthi rebels last month. Pete Hegseth reportedly shared details of the military operation on the Signal messaging app with his brother, wife and lawyer. Israel's military has admitted its soldiers made mistakes when they opened fire on a convoy of emergency vehicles in Gaza last month, killing 15 rescue workers. A deputy unit commander has been dismissed for his role in the attack on ambulances, a fire truck and a UN vehicle. A ship carrying Syria's first wheat delivery says since the fall of the Assad regime has docked in the port of Latakia. Syria's border authority says it marks the beginning of a new chapter in the country's economic recovery. And the US military has deployed for the first time a type of strategic bomber to an airbase in Japan. The B-1B aircraft arrived at Misawa Air Base earlier this week. The US Indo-Pacific Command says the deployment enhances the alliance's capability to respond to any challenges in the region. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Time now to look at the view from Midori House's editors and contributors. Ammar Azouz is a Syrian architect and research fellow at Oxford University. He recently went back to his home country of Syria 14 years after the civil war and brutality of President Bashar al-Assad forced him to flee. This is his account of his return.
It's been 14 years, but I'm finally back in my home city of Homs, western Syria. A city steeped in thousands of years of history, but which now lies in ruins. During Bashar al-Assad's siege of the old city in 2011, its urban fabric and ancient cultural sites were bombarded by his forces. Years of wars have destroyed more than half of the neighborhoods. Yet, amidst the rubble and the shifting sense of power, I have found hope for the future of Syria. People are reclaiming their public spaces again through celebrations, memorials, and gatherings. Syria still faces many pressing challenges, not least the question of reconstruction. Many who have returned have no home to come back to. Yet, as I have walked around the city I once knew so well, I have found entire buildings and streets devoid of people, damaged but still standing buildings that are open to the elements. I enter traditional homes with beautiful but broken facades that have documents, furniture, and clothes long forgotten. There are fears of future loss as some people come to the old city to steal what they can. Even the basalt stone that makes up Homs's architectural style is all too quickly being loaded up and taken away. There are also reasons to be optimistic. Repairs are happening, mostly by the owners themselves, and there's clear opportunity here for those willing to get involved in the rebuild. To make that success, Homs desperately needs a revised urban plan that looks at the city cohesively, creating a reconstruction project that can bring its various communities together and stake their claim in its future. Priority should be given to the ancient quarter of the old city, home to many priceless architectural treasures, from mosques to churches, souks and homes. By reconstructing the heart of Homs and protecting its heritage, we can bring new life to the place and reconnect us with its illustrious past. This city has endured much in the last 14 years, but plenty more in the centuries before. It has rebuilt before, and it can do so again. Amidst this bittersweet homecoming, one thing is clear: the identity of the grand old city does not need to be rebuilt.
That was Amar Azouz. For more from Monocle's editors and contributors, sign up for our free daily newsletter, The Monocle Minute, at monocle.com/minute. 8:35 a.m. in Copenhagen, 7:35 here in London. Now, in Denmark, feeling lonely is considered to be an unacceptable state of being. It is 2 years since Denmark launched an official programme to help the country's 600,000 or so residents who suffer from loneliness. And twice a year, communal meals are organised to bring people together. To tell us more about this phenomenon, I'm joined in the studio by Bruno Kaufmann, Global Democracy Correspondent, Swiss Broadcasting Company, and for the first time in the Monocle Radio studio. And Bruno, it sort of hits the nail on the head that we have spoken to each other 100 times on the radio using distance and remoteness. And yet to meet each other in the flesh is something rather special, isn't it? It's absolutely wonderful to have you in the studio. And it sort of ties in very nicely to the idea that loneliness is something that cannot be talked about. It is felt intensely in Denmark.
Exactly, and thank you for having me here today. It's really great to be in the studio with you. And yes, I mean, this issue of loneliness is obviously something people don't want to talk about because it's not a very attractive idea to be lonely. But what the Danes are doing is basically trying to fight it in a constructive, communal way. And that's the idea of this having spiser tillsammans, that means eating together. So the Danes are invited to organize communal meals, and this is in a way fitting with the Danish tradition of offering your home to others. And in today's time, you need to organize this, and that's exactly what's going on this week.
So how exactly does this thing work? I mean, are lots of people brought together to eat in one place at one moment, or are people, as you say, inviting each other into homes just to sort of welcome people into more private spaces?
Yes, and that's in a way these people movements against loneliness, which is supported by the government, but which is basically an NGO. They are organizing it in a way that you have maps. You can check out where are these meals. There are tips how to start a conversation. They want people to accommodate. I mean, they say you should welcome the people in the door. You should have name tags. It all feels a little bit constructive, but at the same time, it's of course an opener, because it's in a form of it's a reason to be there. And it's also, I mean, many different kind of groups, of associations, city halls, sport clubs. Everybody tries to join in that and to make connections which maybe last beyond this individual dinner.
And loneliness is a recognised serious problem for the Danes, isn't it? I mean, it costs, 7 billion kroner per year in economically. But also, if you are lonely, you are likely to die much younger as well.
That's right. I mean, it's obviously, especially for men, it's the biggest reason for dying early when you are really lonely, because then you are not eating healthy, you are not doing exercises, you are in a way really on your own. And what the Danes are doing is maybe it's not so different in many countries that many people feel lonely. You can be lonely in the middle of a big city, but of course you can also feel like connected when you are totally out in the forest. But at the same time, the Danes have counted on that, as you have said. I mean, they have found out that hundreds of thousands of visits to doctors are because people feel lonely. And this costs a lot for the society. So it makes sense to make an activity, to have a strategy, to really shake hands against loneliness. And that's something which obviously resonates with the Danish idea of community, of being together. On the other side, of course, it's a little bit also a very cultural thing, which may exclude certain people who don't feel so much at home in Denmark.
So explain a little bit more about this cultural problem for certain groups.
I mean, it's in Denmark, it's a very, in a way, an idea of communal through cultural homogeneity and through common language. In Denmark, for instance, Denmark became a democracy when it became a very small country with one language, one culture, one church. And this kind of unity, of course, is a strength, but it's also a weakness in a globalized international world. And many people who doesn't speak so well Danish maybe don't feel so much at home. So in that way, I mean, food is always an opener, a door opener. Doing eating together is an international language. So I think it's a very good way to do it through this kind of communal meals.
Indeed, the Danes are taking this seriously. They want to halve the prevalence of loneliness by 2040. You live in Sweden, but when you go over to Denmark, or when you sort of research the Danish culture, is there a sense that this campaign by the government is actually, loud enough, being welcoming enough? Or is this, we talked before we came on air about the fact that the United Kingdom has a minister for loneliness. I was unaware of that. And one wonders whether it's a question of sort of selling the story a little bit better.
It's a way of doing it, but I mean, in Denmark, really, I think there are efforts to make people more like friendly to each another again. There is not only this loneliness campaign. Also, in many places, you have so-called mandatory greeting zones. That means that there's a sign when you enter the village, and everybody should say hello, hey to each another. And this is maybe another way of looking up and not looking down when you see somebody else. And that's obviously could be felt like an obligation which you don't welcome, but at the same time it's nice to look into the eyes of other people.
Yes, it's incredible to say hello to each other yet remain completely fixed to your mobile phone. Bruno Kaufmann, an absolute pleasure to have you in the studio. Thank you so much for coming in to Monocle Radio. You're listening to The Globalist.
There's a craft to every question, which is why at UBS we query every aspect of the market, working with specialized experts and award-winning research teams, covering over 3,500 stocks in 50 countries, all delivered in a comprehensive library, answering what you want with what you need. UBS, banking is our craft.
Time now for a quick roundup of what's making headlines in the UAE and the Gulf. Joining me from Dubai is the journalist and writer Mustafa Al-Rawi. Good morning to you, Mustafa.
Good morning, Emma.
How's Dubai looking today?
Very nice, I have to say. It's the beginning of Dubai AI Week, so there's a lot happening.
Good. Well, before we let you loose on all that, tell us about with the news from where you are. What's the top story?
Well, as I said, the Dubai AI Week is kicking off, and really there's a bigger sort of trend behind this, which is that the UAE and Dubai has been working at sort of national and emirate level to ensure that it maintains some kind of leadership and, for want of a better word, control over how AI is going to impact our futures. And so the Financial Times, for example, was reporting that AI is going to be used to help write new laws in the UAE, which is an interesting change in attitude towards technology if you compare it to sort of the debates that are happening elsewhere in the world, where really it's about the limiting AI. And here they're talking about bringing AI into the heart of policy making and government, to use that AI technology to support being able to quickly adapt, using AI to suggest where laws can change. And it's really, it's a lot of experts have looked at it and said, okay, maybe this could be the future, but it's still early days. So it's an interesting development in terms of technology and AI in the UAE.
Have we got any details about an example of how AI would be used to formulate law?
At the moment, the details aren't there, of course, with a lot of these announcements. They kind of set the intention and the tone. But the idea being that government won't act in isolation, that the AI will be there as a sort of partner to prompt and suggest where some laws could adapt via what's happening in the real world. And so it's using AI as a partner, if you like, an advisor to government. So it's not suggesting that the robots will, become the policymakers, but more that they're going to become much more nimble and quicker at changing laws, which, to be honest, has been a bit of a problem over the last 25 years. Even though there's been so much change in the UAE, actually changing legislation has been quite difficult, and they've bridged that with a lot of sort of shorter term or more easier to issue decrees, which isn't quite the same thing as changing legislation for the country. So this probably will help speed change up in the future across all areas of life, not just business, but society and other aspects as well.
Let's move to a story in The National about self-driving taxis. This is one of those things like flying taxis and drone deliveries that the world is anticipating to happen, but it is yet to materialise, except where you are.
Yeah, I think we are very close to a cliche, that tipping point. But really, there have been so many different pilots in the UAE in terms of working out self-driving cars, self-driving flying taxis. Already there's a lot of autonomous trams and trains, etc., working across the country. And really the UAE wants to be one of the first places that has a fully integrated transport system that takes advantage of this kind of technology. So really it's sort of a case of, right now it feels like, okay, what is it going to look like? But really what this story is, where the Roads and Transport Authority in Dubai is teaming up with Baidu from China to put 1,000 of these autonomous vehicles on the roads by 2028. This begins to show that in practice, we can expect in the next 18 months even to see a real difference in terms of this autonomous technology.
And how welcome is it?
I think in Dubai in particular, anything that can help alleviate the congestion and the traffic will be welcome, at least in the short term. Of course, we don't know what the medium to long-term impact is going to be in terms of jobs and the economy. But one thing I do know about sort of regulation here is that there is a kind of balance between trying to make sure that innovation isn't stifled, but also ensuring that any new technology has a benign impact. And that's sort of very cultural, to try and find that balance. While maybe in the US, for example, innovation trumps everything at the beginning. And maybe in China, for example, on the other end of the spectrum, it's more about control. So they're always trying to find a middle road. So I think we will see it be quite positive and the public really take to it.
It's an interesting point that you make there, given the fact that the two stories that we've just talked about are to do with, self-driving cars, which is, the acceptance of tech into a human process of driving, and using AI to write laws. Given the fact that when you look from the outside at the likes of the UAE, they seem to be, or you seem to be, an area which is very going gung-ho in terms of embracing new technology. So it's sort of interesting to say that there is a balance being struck there.
Yes, and there is a real conscious concern that you could get left behind in this new era. With AI is controlled essentially by a very small group of companies, and if you aren't sort of at the vanguard of what's happening, you can end up being, dropped back in terms of development. First world countries can become third world countries again in the next 20 years. So there's a lot of opportunity, but there's also a lot of risk. And so I think what the UAE is doing is ensuring that it covers all bases.
Let's move on to another story, which is we're talking about the most modern of modern, and yet what is making the headlines is something from the Iron Age.
So a 3,000-year-old cemetery, as you said, Emma, from the Iron Age has been unearthed in Al Ain, which is in the UAE. And this is a very important find because it shows how, societies and peoples in this part of the world, even 3,000 years ago, were very skilled. And a number of items, vessels, bowls, small cups, beads, weaponry were discovered, which shows that societies were productive. And I think there is an imperfect understanding of this region, particularly in where you are in Europe, that perhaps there's been nothing until the last sort of 20, 30 years. But these archaeological digs show that actually, society goes back a long way and there is a history. And of course, whenever you connect the dots to your past, to your point, it does help you move forward in the future with a greater understanding and more confidence.
And indeed, it was a very sophisticated society as well that's being uncovered.
Yes, which again, I think that imperfect understanding that maybe thinks that here we've always been maybe not at the forefront of civilization. It goes to show that might not have been the case, and actually it's a more mixed picture going back, which I think shows that really wherever you are in the world, we can kind of relate to each other no matter what the time period is. So I've always find these stories very optimistic.
It is lovely to hear that if you wander around Dubai, that you get the sense that you are in a place of total modernity. Yet if you go through many other cities across the world, you will be reminded of heritage, not least because of the remnants of archaeology and old architecture. When you live in the UAE, do you ever get that reminder that actually culturally you are connected to something that runs much deeper into the past?
Absolutely. And even more so in the last sort of 10, 15 years. I mean, the number of museums and exhibits and archaeological finds that have grown up in the last few years are quite phenomenal for a short period of time. And now the touch points are everywhere you look. Of course, we have the modernity. Of course, we have the skyscrapers. Of course, we have the kind of new build stuff that maybe don't lend itself to sort of that feeling of history. But if you look for it, you will find it. And they're increasingly trying to integrate it into everyday life with preserving architecture, both in terms of sort of the recent past, maybe some brutalist designs, and then, going back to sort of 3,000 years. So there is a concerted effort to preserve what has happened and also to combine it with what's new. So there is an understanding that if you don't have both, then you can't really claim to be a leading nation. And so I think that's why the priority is there to ensure that we feel it.
Mustafa Al-Rawi, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. You're listening to The Globalist. Now, in about 8 minutes' time, we'll be joining Chiara Romella for this week's episode of The Menu. It is a chocolate special, but in anticipation of that, let's hear from Chiara herself, host of The Menu on Monocle Radio, to bring us up to date about everything that's happening in the world of food. Happy Easter, Chiara.
Happy Easter Monday. As an Italian, I'm a little bit disappointed that I won't be having a big barbecue today because that is the tradition in Italy. But having relocated, I have to make do.
OK, so we're going to have to talk about this Easter barbecue. What goes on an Italian Easter barbecue?
A little bit of everything, obviously. I would say mostly lamb chops and sausages are normally my friends' chosen meats. And yeah, there is always an attack to the butchers pre-Easter barbecue. So the whole country has to prepare well in advance if they don't want to be caught short by the day. And it's very important. You invite all of your friends. They're always massive, massive occasions.
It's not a family thing. This is a friend. This is a social thing, a friends thing.
Yeah, Easter lunch is with family, Easter Monday barbecue, it's a friends thing. Yeah, it's like Christmas and New Year's, each to their own.
And what's on the Easter menu for the family? I'm writing all this down. What's on the Easter menu for the family for Easter lunch?
Well, obviously lamb, and then the Italian, I suppose, Easter delicacy is the colomba. I'm sure that people at Midori House have actually enjoyed some of it, courtesy of the producer of this very show, Laura Kramer, who's brought in a massive colomba, which is like a kind of a panettone, but shaped like a dove, although many people don't really think it looks very much like a dove.
No, I've seen one, and I'm glad you've told me it was supposed to look like a dove. It just looked a nice shape. And the warmest thanks to Laura Kramer, who's producing the programme today, and is smiling and waving in delight to know that her Columba has made it to the radio. So just tell us a little bit more about the latest from food news now. I mean, a moment ago we had Mustafa Al-Rawi on the line from Dubai, which has now become the world's leading expert in a kind of chocolate.
Yeah, interesting. You said that the menu this week is all about chocolate, so you can't, take me away from this subject. Yes, so many people will know that Dubai chocolate has suddenly become a thing, which it really wasn't until not too long ago. But thanks to TikTok and a video that did really mushroom on there, there was a video posted in 2023 about this bar of chocolate made by a producer called Fix. And that's sort of the original. It's called Can't Get Enough of It. But the popularity of this item has skyrocketed so much that it's actually genuinely caused a shortage in the producing countries, the two main ones of which are the US and Iran. The cost of the kernel has gone up so much. Now, this is combined with the harvest last year being particularly bad in the US, in the sense that in quantity was bad, but in quality was really high. So the kernels were sold, I suppose, as whole nuts, as opposed to the slightly cheaper ones that go into the bar themselves. And so at the moment, some retailers are even having to, ration how many bars of this famous Dubai chocolate, which is made up of kind of a shell of chocolate and then inside the kernels and then a shredded katifi, any one customer can buy. And I have to say, I am one of the culprits because I do have a bar of Dubai chocolate waiting for me in the kitchen.
Wonderful. That's breakfast. But you won't be drinking much on Easter Sunday and Monday, are you? Because there is a huge problem with those who are wishing to sell us alcohol. We're just not buying it anymore.
Yeah, this is interesting. So there is a report that's come out saying that the worldwide consumption of wine in 2024 was at its lowest level in more than 60 years. So lowest sales figures since 1961. That's remarkable. Down 3.3% since the year before. But I think obviously we're all by now quite familiar with the story of, the fact that people are now more health conscious and that the new generation doesn't drink quite as much as before. But I think that's sort of only half of the story, in the sense that, yes, consumption has fallen, but the consumers are actually willing to pay more for their bottles. So what we're seeing, it looks like, is just people who are willing to drink better wine rather than kind of fill their cupboards with plonk and just get through massive quantities of them. There's an associated story here in the UK about how the popularity of buying a large glass of wine in a bar or in a pub has gone down quite a bit. So a lot of restaurants don't really offer that giant kind of 250 ml option anymore. But that's also because people, rather than just drinking the same wine over and over again and trying to I suppose, make up the quantities, are much happier to try different wines, try nicer wines and go from one to the next, and try to get as much taste out of it as possible, rather than, and kind of pacing themselves through the experience rather than just going down and drinking 3 glasses of the same thing.
Chiara Romella, thank you so much for joining us on The Globalist, and a very happy Easter Monday to you. And that's all we have time for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and to the producers, Laura Kramer and Chris Chermak. Our studio manager was Mariella Bevan. After the headlines, there's more music on the way. The briefing is live at midday here in London. The Globalist is back at the same time tomorrow. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening. Have a great week.